This is our 9th lesson in Old Testament history. It's our 4th in the study of Abraham's journey. We're in the 9th station of Abraham's journey. We've seen his nativity in Ur. We've seen his call to go to Canaan from Haran. We've seen Shechem and Bethel, the two places that he pitched his tent for a while and worshiped God and didn't find sufficient pasture for his sheep. We've seen him go to Egypt, where he for the first time told his lie about his wife to try to preserve his own life so that he could be the seed to whom the promise would come. We saw him being driven out of Egypt, though much richer than he went in, back to Bethel, where he had trouble with Lot's herdsmen. We've seen the trouble from the east, where the people from Mesopotamia came and carried Lot away to Dan. We've seen Abraham go to Dan and deliver Lot, come back to the city, on his way back to the city of Shechem, city of Hebron. We found him person to person with Melchizedek, giving him 1/10 of all that he possessed, face to face with the king of Sodom, refusing to accept anything from the king of Sodom, and then in a way, in a figurative way, face to face with God. As he and God make a covenant together, Abram did what he could do. He went and got the sacrifice, he cut the sacrifice, he arranged the sacrifice, he preserved the sacrifice, and he went to sleep. That's all Abram could do. And in that deep sleep, God makes a covenant with Abram that he will be Abraham's shield and protector, that Abraham will be his representative throughout all the earth, throughout all of time. He promised Abraham an innumerable seed, a seed as innumerable as the stars of the heavens, and years passed by. In chapter 16, our study today begins with the story of Hagar and Ishmael, which is a story again of Abraham and Sarah's faith wavering. You can have faith and it waver. You can have faith and it becomes smaller. And that's exactly what occurs in chapter 16 of Genesis. Read with me starting in verse 1. Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Now we're going to find out they've been in the land 10 years. She's borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. That's one of the things she got from going to Egypt, was this Egyptian maidservant. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Now, all of that sounds like an immoral thing. In that part of the world, that was a custom. That was the thing that was done. If the wife could bear no children, then someone else bore children for her. That woman who became pregnant by the father, the husband, would stay in the mistress' tent, in the wife's tent, until the baby was born, and the wife would come out holding the baby after the period of purification. And everybody knew what happened, but everybody would still say it was her child, her son, and the son of her husband. So Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years. How would you like a promise made to you and 10 years later there's no sign it can be fulfilled? That's exactly what's happened to Abram. God had made a promise that he would have an innumerable seed, and 10 years later he doesn't have a single child. And so he's going to try to help God out of the difficulty. And we always get in trouble when we try to help God out of his difficulty. What he'd need to do was wait. Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Now I want you to read that. Gave her to her husband to be his wife. And from that time forward, Hagar will be called the wife of Abram. He'll have two wives now, Sarai and Hagar, and Abram will be called her husband. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai, so she spoke evil to Sarai. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between me and you. Abram's trouble in the house, right? Abram should have waited. Sarai should have waited. Watch Abram's reply in verse 6. Your servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. She drove her away from the camp. The angel of the Lord found Hagar. It didn't say a angel. It says the angel. We'll have fun with this as we continue our study. This is a particular being. I think it's the Lord. I think it's the Word of God that later will become Jesus. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur, way down in the south, nearly out of Promised Land. And he said, Hagar, this is God speaking, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will also increase your descendants, that they will be too numerous to count. And all of the tribes of Arabia, all the Arab people today, come from this lady and her son Ishmael. But the servant is always to submit to the master, even if the master is froward, even if the master is ungodly. Go back and submit. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you're now with child, and you'll have a son, and you'll name him Ishmael, which means God hears. She thinks God is not concerned, that God is not hearing her. And so God names her son, I am listening, I will hear. For the Lord has heard your misery. Now the boy is described, or the man really, that the boy will grow up to be. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility among or toward all his brothers. If there ever has been a prophecy fulfilled, that one has been fulfilled. As the Arabian tribes throughout all of time fought one another, sheik against sheik, and kingdom against kingdom, they have constantly been at each other's neck, constantly being hostile toward their brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. That's really Bir, or God Laharoi, the God who hears my word, who hears my voice. I have now seen the one who sees me. That's why the well is called Bir Laharoi, the well of the living God who sees me. It's between Kadesh and Bered. Kadesh is that place where Israel later will encamp to enter Promised Land. She has been driven all the way out of Abraham's land by the anger and by the ill will of her mistress. But now God sends her back. Verse 15. So Hagar bore Abram a son. Notice, bore Abram a son. And Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. 11 years after he enters Promised Land, he finally has a seed. And Sarah and Abram want the seed line of Genesis 3:15 to be traced through Ishmael, because they do not believe that they can have a child. Their faith in God is still there, but it's not as firm as once it was. It's not as full as once it was. Now we'll come back to Hagar and Ishmael later. Chapter 17, God makes a second covenant with Abram. This covenant is sign and token of the covenant of Genesis 15 that we studied in our last lesson. Remember the covenant? After Abraham is dead, his children will come back to this very land he's in. They will possess that land. They will rule that land. And they will become a great nation in that land. And God had given immediately a sign by the burning up of the sacrifice that Abram had arranged to God. But now God's going to give a continual confirmation, a continual covenant that will confirm the covenant of Genesis 15. And it's called the covenant of circumcision. Let's read that together, starting in Genesis 17. It comes about 13 years later, when Abraham was 99 years old. So there's 13 years between Genesis 16:16 and Genesis 17:1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. That's the word, the two words, El Shaddai. God, the breasted one, the nourisher, the feeder. As a mother feeds her children, so God feeds his children. I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. God says, I've come to tell you something to do and tell you something I will do. He said, I've come to tell you to walk before me. I love the fact that God never tells his children to run before him, leap before him, fly before him. He does what young and old can do alike. Walk before me. If you'll just do that, then you'll be blameless. I will forgive your sins. I will confirm my covenant. You walk, I will forgive, I will confirm. Abram fell face down. That's the right position to be when you're facing God. And God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Not just one great nation, but many nations. Israel, the Arabs, and when he marries Keturah, many other nations will come from Abram's loins. No longer will you be called Abram, which means exalted father, but you'll be called Abraham, which means the father of many nations. But it means more than that. The word, the name of the Lord is Jehovah or Yahweh. And it's a rough breathing H. And that H, that name of God, is put in Abram's name, and he becomes Abraham. And God puts his very sacred name in the middle of Abram's name, so that he's not only the exalted father of many nations, he now is the exalted, the one that is exalted by the name of God, the sacred name being in his name. And every time anybody says Abraham, they're pronouncing God's name and saying, this is the man of God. He says, I've made you a father of many nations. Verse 6, I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. Paul says in the book of Galatians that because we've been baptized and we've put on Christ, that we're not only now saved, he said we're Abraham's children, heirs according to the promise. God is still keeping this covenant, not with the physical seed of Abraham, but with the spiritual seed of Abraham. Notice verse 8. The whole land of Canaan, where you're now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. I will be their God. He's not possessing any of this land when he dies, except a cave for a burial place. But all of this land will be his by promise in days to come. But now the sign. Then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant. See, it's a conditional thing, conditioned upon Abraham's faithfulness. As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision. This wasn't the first time anybody was circumcised, but this is the first time circumcision has become a covenant. It will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. The covenant is, you walk with me and I'll walk with you. Circumcision is the sign of that covenant. Verse 12 says, for the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. So here's an outward sign. Circumcision is an outward sign of this covenant that God and Abraham had in the heart and in the spirit. But now God speaks to Sarah, and Isaac is promised. Ishmael will not be the son through whom the seed is to be traced, through whom the line is to follow. God said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, she shall no longer be called Sarai. Her name shall be Sarah. Notice that sacred name is put in her name too. Sarai means princess, and so does Sarah. But Sarah means God's princess. That H in our language, that in the Hebrew language, is put in her name. She becomes God's princess on this occasion. I will bless her, and I will surely give you a son by her. Now she's a barren woman. She's never been able to bear any children. Abraham is 99 years old when this is being said. Sarai is 89 years old. If she's ever had the ability to have children, and she didn't, it's now ceased to be with her after the manner of women. It will take a double miracle for this word to be performed. She'll have to be made fertile, and she'll have to be made fertile again. I will bless her, and I will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her, so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of the people will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live with your blessing. He said, Lord, what you're saying is too hard. It's impossible. Faith wavered a bit again, didn't it? He did not believe God this time simply because God said it. He laughed in unbelief. And he said, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said to him in verse 19, yes, Ishmael will live before me, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you'll call him Isaac. You know what Isaac means in the Hebrew language? This is one of God's great points of humor. Isaac means laughter. Every time they're going to call Isaac to dinner or speak his name, they're going to be saying laughter. And Abraham will remember that he laughed in unbelief when he heard that Isaac will be born. God says, I will establish my covenant with him, not with Ishmael, and for his descendants after him as an everlasting covenant. As for Ishmael, I've heard you, and I will greatly increase his number. He will become the father of 12 rulers, and I'll make him a great nation. I'm going to bless him because I've heard your cry that he might live before me. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. Isaac has been promised. Ishmael has been promised blessing. But a son named Isaac has been promised to Abraham, and the covenant will be through him. Notice verse 23 to the end of chapter 17. On that very day, Abraham does not hesitate to obey God. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael, and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and circumcised them, as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that same day. And every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. Now all now have the sign of the covenant that God has made with Abraham. We have 10 minutes left in our study. And so let's look at chapter 18 and 19 and see the great incident of Sodom and Gomorrah. When you say those words to any Bible student, you're saying sinfulness, and you're saying judgment by fire. Chapter 18, verse 1. This is all before Isaac is born. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and he saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, if I found favor in your sight, then I pray sit under this tree. I'll get a little water. You rest here. I'll get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and go your way now that you've come to your servant. Abraham did not know he was talking to 2 angels and the Lord. He thought he was talking to 3 ordinary men. The writer of Hebrews says, we must not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some have entertained angels thereby, unaware. So they sit under the tree. Abram goes to Sarah, his wife, and says, take 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and bake some bread. He went out to the herd, got a choice calf, and killed it, and prepared it. Got some curds and milk, and brought the meat and the bread and the curds and the milk, and they ate sitting under the tree. And finally, one of them said, or they said, where's your wife Sarah? He said, there, in the tent. Imagine he's wondering, how do they know her name is Sarah? Maybe they heard me say it. Then the Lord said, the Lord is one of the 3. Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, and Abraham and Sarah were very old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself. She did not laugh aloud. She just laughed inside and said, after I'm worn out and my master is old, will I not have this pleasure? Then the Lord's one of the 3. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Will I really have a child now that I'm old? Here is an important question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? What's the answer to that question? No. I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, and she said, I didn't laugh. And the Lord said, the Lord's one of the 3. Yes, you did laugh. Now, the men get up to leave, and they look down toward Sodom. And Abraham walks along with them. And the Lord says, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do, since he's surely going to be a great and a powerful nation, and I've chosen him, that he will direct his children, his household after him? The Lord said to Abram, the cry of the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great they've come up to me. I've come down to see and to destroy the city. The men turned away, 2 of them we'll find out, and went toward Sodom, but Abram remained standing before the Lord. Then Abram approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 10 righteous people there? God says, I won't destroy it if there are 100 righteous people there. He said, I won't destroy if there's 100. What if there's 50? He said, I won't destroy if there's 50. What if there's 10? I'll not destroy it if there are 10. And so finally, God went away from Abraham, and Abraham returned home. The 2 angels, chapter 19, verse 1, arrived at Sodom in the evening. Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. He got up, he bowed down, he asked them to come to his house. They went into his house, and the men of Sodom wanted to know these men, and they mean sexually. They were all what we would call today from this city Sodomites. They were homosexuals. And instead of sending out these men, Lot wanted to send out his daughters, but that didn't happen. The 2 angels reached out their hand and blinded all these men, and they staggered away. And the angels said to Lot, you must get out of this city now. And he lingered. And finally, the angels took Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters, his sons-in-law would not go, and took them, drugged them out of the city, and told them, you do not dare look back at that city. But she did. Lot's wife not only lingered, she looked back longingly at that city that she was leaving, because she was leaving there the things she desired and the things she loved. And she was turned by God into a pillar of salt. That night, the 2 daughters get to thinking, if our father dies and we're out here in this wilderness, he'll have no seed. Our line will end. So they got their father drunk that night. And the oldest daughter went in and slept with her father. And she became pregnant and bore a son named Moab. And that's the father of the Moabites. And then the second night, or the night later anyway, they got him drunk again. And the younger daughter went in Isn't Sodom really affecting Lot's household? She went in and slept with her father. And another son, Ben-Ammi, was born. And he becomes the father of the Ammonites. And when Israel finally enters Promised Land, these two nations, the nation of Ammon and the nation of Moab, will give them the most of trouble, along with the sons of Ishmael and the other sons of Abraham by his other wives. Israel will be mostly troubled by their kinsmen. Still, Abraham does not have the promised seed. He wished Ishmael would be the promised seed, but God will not allow it. Isaac is promised. In Lot's departure from Sodom and Gomorrah, we learn the result of living and dwelling and mingling with wicked people. And we learn that Abraham had the blessing in being separated from that wicked city and dwelling in mountainous country. But Abraham still has no seed. Will God be faithful to his promise? God has said 1 year and I'll be back. 1 year and the covenant that I've made with you will now be made with your children. And we'll look to see if God is faithful to that promise in our next lesson. God give you peace in believing in Jesus. In our study of Old Testament history, we're in the middle of the study of Abraham. I'd like for us to briefly think about the 9 stations that we've already carried Abraham through. There'll be 16 in his life. We've just finished the very busiest time of Abraham's life, that 9th station. But the first station was Ur. And the thing to remember there is nativity. Here's where Abram was born. Here's where he came to maturity. The second station is Haran. And the thing to remember there is Terah, his father, died, and he was called a second time to go into the Promised Land, into Palestine or into Canaan. The third station is Shechem. And this is his first stop in Promised Land between the Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. There he pitched his tent, fed his sheep for a while, and built an altar unto God. When the pasture ran out, he went down to Bethel, very important city throughout all of our Bible study. One of the golden calves of Israel's idolatry will be erected there later. Here Abraham again pitched his tent, built an altar, and fed his sheep. When the pasture ran out, he passed through the southland all the way down to Egypt. There's always grain in Egypt when there's grain nowhere else. And there he fed his sheep, but there he also told the lie that Sarah was just his sister and not his wife. And Pharaoh took her to be his wife, and God cursed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh drove Abram and Sarah out of the land, but sent him away with great possessions, and Sarah with a handmaid named Hagar. They came back into the Promised Land, and they dwelt for a while at Bethel, and then there was trouble between Lot and Abram's herdsmen, and Lot took the good land, and Abram took the mountain country and went down and dwelt in Hebron. Trouble came from the east, and they moved from Hebron. From Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot is carried captive all the way up to Dan in the northernmost part of the land, up near the waters of Merom, and that's the 8th station. And Abram went up there to deliver Lot, and he brought Lot, and he brought Sodom and all of Sodom's people and all of Lot's things back toward the south part of the Promised Land, toward Hebron. And there at that 9th station, we saw 9 things happen, the last 2 of which was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the birth of Lot's 2 sons through his daughters, the incestuous relationship that he had in his drunken state, that will be the countries of Ammon and the countries of Moab. That's an important thing. Not just the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but the 2 boys. Because this will explain why when God sends them into Promised Land, he really doesn't want them to fight Moab or Ammon, because they are brothers. In chapter 20, we begin the 10th lesson of our study. We might call this, well, I don't know exactly what I'd call this now that I think about it, but it's lying. It's Abraham's lie again, and it's the birth of Isaac. In chapter 20, start reading with me in verse 1. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev. That's the south. He lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar. I know what he's doing. He's looking for pasture land. A man that has 318 grown slaves in his own house that are a standing militia would have thousands of people in his household. Probably tens of thousands of sheep. Takes a lot of pasture land. And the mountainous country that he lives in doesn't have that much grain. So he has to find it on the coast. So he's down near the coast, the Mediterranean in Gerar. And Abraham said of his wife Sarah in verse 2, she is my sister. Same lie. You would think that Abram would not repeat that. Abraham would not repeat that lie. He's just like you and just like me. He's going to make the same mistake more than once. Jesus recognized that, didn't he? When Peter said to Jesus, how many times shall I forgive my brother if he sins against me? Until 7 times in a day? Jesus said not 7 times in a day, but 70 times 7 in a day if he repents. And so he's going to repent of saying she's my sister, but he's going to do it again. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. I want you to remember that this lady's over 90 years of age. I mean, she must have been one good-looking older lady, and I would suggest that Abimelech was an older king. And God said to Abimelech in a dream one night, came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you're as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman. Now, God's been gracious to Abimelech in letting him know that he is about to commit a grievous sin. The sin is not getting another wife. The sin is getting another man's wife. She is a married woman. Now, Abimelech had not gone near her. So he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she's my sister? Did she not also say, he is my brother? I've done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. He said, I'm innocent. I did not know the woman was a married lady. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I've kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. I spoke to you before you sinned. Now watch verse 7. Now return the man's wife. That's what you need to do when you have another man's wife. For he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. Isn't that interesting? I mean, Abraham is one that lied. And yet God said, this is my man. He lied, but he's still God's man. He is a prophet. I will still hear his prayer. Abraham was weak, not unbelieving. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die. So him and all of his household are dead unless he returns the man's wife. Early in the morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials. He's going to do it quickly. He doesn't want to die. When he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Maybe they'd heard about Egypt. Then Abram came in, and then he brought Abram in and said, what have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you brought us such a great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You've done these things to me that should not be done. Abimelech asked Abraham, what is your reason for doing this? Abraham is going to reply in a way that lets us know he's still still does not have his full weight down on God, his full trust in God. Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. He said, I was afraid. She's a good-looking lady. I know she's an older lady, but she's a good-looking lady. And I was afraid that some of your people would kill me and take her. Besides, now watch him try to justify himself. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother. And she became my wife. Said, I told you the truth. She's my sister. But he intended to deceive. And with the intent to deceive, the truth becomes a lie. I may say something that's wrong ignorantly. I'm just wrong. That's not a lie. But anything I tell to deceive somebody, that's a lie. And Abraham intended to deceive. Now notice verse 13. Now when God made me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. So they've told this lie over and over and over again. Abraham is using her to protect himself and is not seemingly not that concerned about what happens to her. I'm not saying that to make light of Abraham. I'm just saying that so we don't make too much of Abraham. He was a man like us, subject to the same foibles, same temptations, and the same weakness. His strength was he always came back to God. He always repented of the evil he did. Now watch Abimelech's response in verse 14. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham. Abraham's being blessed by God even when he's doing wrong. That's not, again, to make light of Abraham. That's to make great of God. Isn't God great? He has promised Abraham blessings. He's fulfilling his covenant even when it appears as if Abraham is not. And he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you. Live wherever you like. You choose the place that you want to live. To Sarah he said, now she has been wronged. And so some token must be paid to her. Some ransom paid for the wrong done to her. So in verse 16, chapter 20, Genesis, to Sarah he said, I'm giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. That's about 25 pounds of silver. That's a lot of money. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. He paid to Abraham the dowry that he would have paid had she been his sister, to cover any shame or any dishonor that he might have brought upon Sarah. He is willing to pay the price. He's given Abraham all kinds of riches. He has given the 1,000 shekels of silver. He's returned Sarah to him. He's announced to all the people that this woman is to be honored. And so now Abraham prays to God. Verse 17. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, his slave girls, so that they could have children again. For the Lord had closed every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. They'll have no children until finally Sarah is back with Abraham. I don't know all to make of that. I am always, when I read that, I'm always a little disappointed that my hero, Abraham, has told the lie again. But then I'm always comforted to know even the friend of God, even the heroes of our Bible, are men subject to the temptations and the troubles and the trials that I am. I'm not grateful that Abraham lied, but I am grateful that it is recorded that he came back and God and man honored him. Now in chapter 21, you have the second thing that occurs here in this 10th station of Gerar, or just outside of Gerar. And that's the birth of Isaac, the promised seed of a year ago. Read with me, chapter 21, starting verse 1. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he'd said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he'd promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac, laughter, to laugh. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now, we're amazed at that. But I want you to remember that Abraham was born when his father Terah was 130 years old. And Abraham will have 6 sons after this one by his wife Keturah, and many sons after this one by the concubines that he'll take. So the problem is not Abraham's age. The problem is not Abraham's virility. The problem has been Sarah's barrenness. And it was that way on purpose, so that the credit and the glory could be given to God in the birth of Isaac. Now watch Sarah's response. This is good. 21 verse 6. Sarah says, God has brought me laughter. Literally brought me Isaac. He's brought me laughter. And everyone who hears about this will laugh. They'll Isaac with me. Said, we're happy now. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I born him a son in his old age. Notice, one child is called children. We'll maybe deal with that later on. But she has borne Abraham children. Now, Ishmael doesn't like that. And so Ishmael is jealous and rebels and mocks. And therefore, he and his mother have to leave the camp, starting in verse 8 of chapter 21. The child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. Now, I don't know exactly how old that would make Isaac, probably 3 or 4 years old. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham was mocking. He wasn't just playful. He was mocking Isaac and saying, you think you're going to be the heir? I am the number one son. And she said to Abraham, Sarah said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. She is wanting the competition gone. The matter displeased Abraham greatly. But God said to him, don't be distressed. Listen to what Sarah tells you. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he's your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He sent them on their shoulders and sent her off with the boy. Now he was 14, when Isaac was born. So he's now 17 or so years old. He's not a little baby anymore. He's a teenager. And they went off and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. They're out of promised land. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes, and she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat there nearby and began to sob. And God heard her sobbing and said, what's the matter? Do not be afraid. God's heard the boy crying. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I'll make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes. She saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him for Egypt. Now there's the disinheritance of Ishmael. Ishmael will not inherit with Isaac. Strange thing about all this. He must still love Abraham. Because when Abraham dies, not just Isaac will bury him. Ishmael will come back. And Ishmael and Isaac, his 2 sons, will bury him. None of the sons of Keturah will be back. None of the sons of the concubines will be back. But this firstborn son of Abraham, not the firstborn through whom the seed will come, but the first child that Abraham bore will be back to bury his father. Isaac now has no contestant. Isaac will be the one through whom the seed of Abraham will be traced. Isaac will be the one through whom the seed of the woman who's going to curse the devil, crush the devil's head, will be born. We haven't really solved the problem that exists between Abraham and Abimelech, though. Abraham has sinned grievously against Abimelech. And Abimelech has told him, because he found out he was a prophet of God, you go anywhere you want to in my land and dwell. So Abraham and Abimelech make a treaty. They make a covenant. In chapter 21, verses 22 through 34. I'm not going to read all of this because I want to give a lot of time for the last point, and that is the offering of Isaac in the land of Moriah. But this covenant does need to be paid attention to because it talks about the integrity of the of the Amorite. And I understand why Abraham's seed cannot have this land right now, because this is still a righteous people. But Abimelech comes to Abraham, and he says, it's easy for me to see that God is with you. So I want you to swear to me that you'll not deal falsely, that you'll lie no more, that you'll not try to deceive me anymore, nor my children. Show to me and the country where you're living the same kindness I've shown you. Abraham says, I swear it, I will do it. And then they had a complaint about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had ceased. And Abimelech said, I didn't know about that. And he stopped it, and he didn't do it anymore. So Abraham brought him 7 ewe lambs, not just 7 ordinary lambs. He bought 7 lambs that could increase his flock. To a well, they offered a sacrifice there, and they poured blood around the base of that well, and they called that well from then on Beersheba, which means the well of the oath. And it's the southernmost city in the promised land. So just before you cross the border out of God's land, there's a well to remind Abraham. And just before Abimelech enters God's land, there's a well there to remember him, that they are in blood covenant together. They're not going to harm each other. Now in chapter 22, you have the last point on our lesson here, and the place is Moriah. And the thing is the offering of Isaac, or as it says at the top of my Bible here, Abraham tested. Read some with me here. We'll not read all this chapter perhaps, but read some with me. Chapter 22 of Genesis, verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here am I, he replied. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Now, it's not Mount Moriah in the city of Jerusalem. It's a mountain in the land of Moriah. The land of Moriah is the land just west of the Sea of Galilee, in the southern part of that sea. And it's probably the hill of Morah, which is the highest mountain in that little range that he's going to offer Isaac on. Early in the morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey. Notice, no question, no long discussion with his wife, no complaint about what God has said. He just goes. He got him by promise. He can get him back by promise. He took with him 2 of his servants, his son Isaac, enough wood for the burnt offering, and he set out to the place God had told him. On the 3rd day, they walked 2 long days. Now on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to the servants, stay here. Isaac and I will go offer sacrifice. He took the wood for the burnt offering, put it on his son Isaac. He himself carried the fire and the knife. As they got near where they were going to offer the sacrifice, Isaac said, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb? And Abraham by faith says, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. When they reached the place, Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood on it, this is in verse 9, bound his son Isaac, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Isaac is a young man. He's not a little boy. He could have resisted this, but he didn't. He reached out the knife to slay his son. As far as Abraham is concerned, he sacrificed Isaac. The knife is in his hand. It's about to cut his throat. But the angel of the Lord called out to him, verse 11, Abraham, Abraham. I believe that's the best news Abraham ever heard. Here am I, he replied. The angel said, do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you've not withheld from me, your son, your only son. Now, I understand what this says. When he says, now I know, it doesn't mean that God didn't know up until that time. Because both in the Hebrew and the Septuagint, it uses a word that means I know for sure. This is a sign. This is to indicate that you'll hold nothing back from me. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. Now that wasn't luck. Before the foundation of the world, God knew that would happen. Abraham says God will provide the sacrifice, and God has provided the sacrifice. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. And so he called that place Jehovah Jireh. And to this day, that means the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Abraham has offered a living sacrifice, his son Isaac. I'm grateful God accepted the ram as a substitute, but he offered a living sacrifice. I've offered a living sacrifice. You've offered a living sacrifice, our own body. And that's because God has provided the sacrifice of the ram on the cross. Now God will renew his covenant, beginning in verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself. The writer of Hebrews will refer to this and say, since God can swear by none greater, he swore by himself. We always swear by somebody greater than we are. There's nobody greater than God. So he has to swear by whom? Himself. He said, I swear by me. I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you've done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed because you've obeyed me. If you don't mind, I have just one argument with that translation. In the latter part of verse 17, the Hebrew language is singular. It says, your descendants will take possession of the gates of his enemies. He's not talking about seed plural in 17, the latter part in 18. He's talking about seed singular, that seed of the woman who is to crush the devil's head and bless all mankind. That's the offspring, singular offspring, through whom all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So God repeats the seed promise of Genesis 3:15 to Isaac. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. You see, this brings us to a good stopping point for this lesson, because Abraham has passed the test, not just an examination, but the test. He has indicated by his offering of Isaac that he'll withhold absolutely nothing from God. He has renounced all that he has and says it belongs to God, and declared himself a steward, not just of the sheep, not just of the slaves, not just of the cattle, but of his only son, Isaac. You and I must declare all that we are and all that we have belong to God. And then the Lord will provide for us. Let's do it.